Okay, so in the last video, one of the comments really made me think of the sort of father figure, super egoic character to Wizpig, right? Because he's kind of like those giant parents in 90s cartoons. What I can't remember the name of the cartoon, but it's these cartoons where the parents are towering giant sort of figures compared to the children, and Wizpig almost kind of seems that way. And I think that there is probably some evidence to support this kind of analysis, because the whole game is in some way about parents, in the sense that what's going on in the plot essentially is that Timber the tiger is in his island, Timber's Island. I find it interesting that it's named after him instead of after his parents, right? Timber's Island is his island. That's where he lives with his parents. But his parents are not there. They're gone. They've gone to visit the Kong family over in Donkey Kong Island, I presume. And that's where Diddy lives. So that's interesting, because there is immediately an asymmetry here, which again is reflected by the way the two columns of text are presented in the manual. On the one hand, Diddy lives in an island whose name is the name of the father figure. Diddy lives on Donkey Kong Island. And the parents are there. The parents are very much there. They're not only there, they're having a big parent party. They're, Donkey Kong parents and Timber parents are met. On the other hand, Timber lives on an island of his own name without the parents. There is some sort of a theme of like a coming of age kind of story, I suppose, a symbolic maturing from one's subordination to the superego in some way. And Diddy is, the story tells of how Diddy flies from Donkey Kong Island to Timber Island. There is this sort of movement from one island to the other. From the island that represents submission to the paternal authority to the island that doesn't. So immediately there's all this sort of constellation of things going on. And of course, Wizpig then, in this context, is kind of like the big giant adult chasing them down the island. Okay, so that's one thing. But what else? Well, it may be worth mentioning that if we're going to be talking about paternal authority, right, so the commenter in my last video also mentioned how light associated to Wizpig is traditionally associated to the masculine, right? Like the sun as opposed to the moon, and these kinds of dualities of association. So Wizpig is a paternal figure, and he also somehow could represent specifically the paternal figure as masculine. So it's interesting to take that in context when analyzing what's going on with the protagonists of this game, because there is only one woman character. There is only one female character in the game, and it's Pipsy, right? And it's interesting because her character is pretty crucial in the plot in some weird way, because she is the one who hears the message from Taj. See, this is the funny thing about this. There is only one female character in the game, but she is somehow connected to Taj, who is the ruler of the island, who has been thrown out of the mountain, right? And Pipsy herself and her family also are said to live in the mountain. They used to live in the mountain and have been thrown out. Both Taj and Pipsy have been thrown out of the mountain. So there is already a weird association between the eternal genie spirit of the island and Pipsy. So it's funny also because, of course, the protagonist of the game is Diddy. And so, you know, it's not Dixie Kong Racing, right? Why isn't it Dixie Kong Racing? Well, I sadly haven't read much about the history of this game, but I get the impression that this game was made really quickly, kind of in a rush, because Rareware needed to develop their characters in some way as a brand. I may be wrong about this, but even if I'm wrong about that, let's just assume that Rareware knew, or the business people engaged in creating the game know that Diddy is going to sell more, right? And in that decision is a whole series of structures in place, right? Of who plays video games, right? Whether video games are for boys or for girls, and the business decision, like the money-making drive behind that, and by extension, the kind of the status quo solidifying force of that. And it's interesting to me because what tends to happen with this kind of analysis, at least I think, is that media, mainstream kind of media like this, has on the surface some sort of a message that is egoically status quo affirming, right? As in, you know, Diddy Kong is the star of the game and he's a guy. Pipsy is the only female character and she's, in appearance, sort of kind of like a token female character almost. Like, you know, she has a little bow tie. It's kind of like the Minnie Mouse idea of a female character. But then under the surface, there is something going on, I think, where what the game is saying unconsciously goes against the status quo, but it does so unconsciously. So anyway, yeah, this is all sort of complicated. I'm not sure even how to begin to approach it, but that would be my working hypothesis at the moment. I'm interested in making this analysis more of a dynamic kind of analysis where opinions can change from video to video instead of it being one big scripted kind of block. I think that keeps with the spirit of Diddy Kong Racing itself, in that it is a racing game. You're moving forward. It's sort of a future-oriented, goal-oriented game in that sense. And I find it interesting how it kind of demands of me that kind of analysis, in the same way that Super Monkey Ball did. And of course, it's interesting to me how Super Monkey Ball is already also a game about a monkey ascending up to heaven kind of thing. And the symbolism of that, a male monkey ascending up to heaven. So anyway, that's kind of like, maybe that was too much of a detour. But to wrap up the whole thing about Pipsy, or what I think about that, she is the one who hears the message of Taj. To hear, see, this has like obviously a spiritual connotation to it, because Taj is meant to be a spiritual character in some sense. He's a genie, so his nature is spirit in some sense, and so to hear that message would be to be in touch with that. So of course, the game is playing with these kinds of stereotypes, right, of the female as being more in contact with the unconscious, right, with the watery, the spiritual, and the masculine, or Diddy and Timber, as being more in touch with the sort of solar and the directly visible, directly physical kind of thing, right? So the male characters here are relying on Pipsy to relay back to them the message of the depths. And I feel that by playing with those stereotypical and rigid roles, those stereotypical gender roles, at a depth kind of level, the game is simultaneously dissolving those roles in the story that it is telling. At least, again, that's my intuition at the moment, because that seems to be what happens in most of the games and movies that I'm interested in. So anyway, yeah, that's an initial kind of approach. We'll see where it goes. Thanks.